My ex left me in hopes of finding love and then expected me to pitch in financially for her new family. Here's how it all unfolded 8 years ago. My ex, Adu, and I ended our relationship just after our twins were born. We'd only been together for about 14 months when she found out she was pregnant, and we both felt overwhelmed. We thought we should give things a try for the sake of the kids, hoping that maybe the family aspect would make the relationship work. I'll admit we weren't exactly a perfect match from the start. Sure, we had some good moments, but it wasn't the kind of deep, lasting bond. Still, when she became pregnant, I thought maybe we could make it work. Honestly, though, we were as different as night and day, but we tried our best for the twins. For a while, things were okay. We had the usual disagreements, as people do, but nothing major. We managed co-parenting fairly well without getting into big fights. Then she met someone else, a man she thought she could build a future with. I understood her desire for a fresh start, something different from what we had. She was straightforward about it, and we both agreed that going our separate ways was the best option. I can't say I was heartbroken, given that our relationship wasn't exactly solid, but we ended things pretty peacefully, as far as breakups go. Afterward, we fell into a routine with co-parenting. Things went smoothly, or as smooth as possible, with two people raising kids from separate households. We divided our time with the kids equally, kept communication focused on them, and co-parented well. We both wanted to ensure the twins didn't experience any tension, so we put in a real effort. The kids got time with both of us, and since we split everything equally, there was no child support involved. About 2 years later, Adu met the man who's now her husband. He wasn't the one she started dating right after our breakup. This was someone new. He had a daughter the same age as our twins, and as she and her new partner became serious, she told me about him. I wanted to support her, to make things easier for the kids, and I was okay with the idea of them having another father figure. But things began to change when she mentioned including her stepdaughter in the same way we included our twins. She casually suggested, wouldn't it be nice if we did things as one big family initially? It sounded harmless, just a way to blend our families. But then she started hinting that I should treat her stepdaughter like my own. Let me be clear, I have nothing against her stepdaughter. She's just a child caught in this situation. But Adu seemed to think that, because we were all linked through the twins, I was obligated to include her stepdaughter in every outing and activity I did with my kids. When we first talked about it, I told her I understood her desire to involve everyone, but it wasn't my job to play dad to her new husband's child. I was already fully committed to being a dad to my twins. Still, she kept pressing the issue. It's tricky to navigate co-parenting. You want to support your family while maintaining peace with your ex and her new partner. But her expectations kept growing. Things got even more complicated when she started asking me to babysit her stepdaughter whenever I had my twins. If I planned a weekend outing with my kids, she'd call and ask if I could take her stepdaughter along. Occasionally I didn't mind, but it soon became a constant expectation. Look, I don't mind helping once in a while, but I didn't sign up to be a third parent to her husband's kid. It didn't seem fair to me or to my twins. After a while, I noticed that every special plan I made for my twins somehow turned into a discussion about the other kids in her household. It felt like I couldn't spend time with just my own kids anymore. Whenever I bought gifts or planned a surprise outing, she'd complain that it wasn't fair if her stepdaughter wasn't included. She even got upset once, because I didn't spend as much on a gift for her stepdaughter as I did for the twins. That's when I decided to set boundaries. I told her my time and resources would be dedicated to my twins. As expected, she didn't take it well. She accused me of being selfish, of not supporting her entire family. She wanted a big, blended family, but that wasn't something I'd agreed to. I explained that, while I wanted the twins to feel included, it didn't mean I had to support children who weren't mine the same way. Since that conversation, we've moved from co-parenting to more parallel parenting, if that makes sense. We stick to our own time with the kids and rarely do anything as one big family. We don't share plans or mix her household with mine. It keeps things simple and allows me to focus on my kids without added expectations. Yet, every now and then she brings it up, acting like I should feel guilty for not stepping in to help raise all the kids under her roof. Over the years, her family has only grown more complicated. She and her husband had a child together, and they later took in her husband's nephew. So now, at her place, there's my twins, their stepsister, a step-cousin, and a half-sister. Adu tries to keep everyone feeling like one big family, but I've made it clear my focus is solely on my kids. Every time I think things have finally settled, something new seems to pop up, but I've stayed firm on my boundaries. I don't think it's unreasonable to focus on the two kids who are actually mine. Supporting her decisions as a mom is one thing, but being expected to be a parent to everyone under her roof is something else entirely. Fast forward a bit, and this is where things started to really go off the rails. With each new addition to Ado's household, it's only gotten harder to keep my boundaries intact. In the beginning, we managed to find a balance where I could focus on my role as a father without getting entangled in her new family setup. But over time, her expectations kept increasing, and it felt like every few months she wanted me to take on something new, whether it was involving her stepdaughter, her husband's nephew, or their own baby together. It was like they kept adding responsibilities, and somehow I was expected to pick up part of that weight. Then came this whole issue about a school trip. My kids attend a smaller school, which means they're in a mixed-age class. This setup places them in the same classroom as their stepsister and step-cousin. I understand that's a bit unconventional, but it works for the school, and I don't mind. What I hadn't anticipated, though, was how it would turn into a big issue with their mom and stepdad about what I was supposed to pay for. This trip wasn't just any field trip, it was a visit to an interactive museum, an experience that promised to be memorable. The school had organized hands-on activities and workshops for the kids, and it was on the pricier side, no question. But my twins were excited, and I thought it would be something special for them. I could afford it, so I went ahead and paid for my twins to go. I shared this with Adu, expecting her to be happy for the twins. I was wrong. The moment I mentioned paying, she went oddly quiet, then bluntly told me that if her other kids couldn't go, it wasn't fair. At first I thought she was joking. Surely she didn't mean I should pay for the other two as well. But no, she was completely serious. She started saying it wasn't right for our twins to go on such an exclusive trip if her other kids couldn't join. I tried to stay calm and explained that I was covering my twins' expenses because they're my responsibility. I even suggested she and her husband could look into fundraising or saving for the other kids if it was that important. But then she hit me with, "You need to think about how they'll feel watching your kids go on this trip and being left out." Apparently, their whole household would be thrown into chaos if the kids didn't have identical experiences. That's when things got heated. Her husband jumped in, insisting it was unfair to treat the kids differently. I believe in fairness too, but there are limits. His stepdaughter and nephew aren't my responsibility, and I don't have unlimited funds. I asked him point blank why it should be my duty to cover expenses for all the kids in their home, and he just looked at me like I was the selfish one. He even went on a tirade about how the kids should be treated as siblings and accused me of sabotaging their family unity. I get that no child likes being left out, but they have to understand that I'm not their dad. Adu made the choice to bring these other kids into her family, and I won't be guilted into covering expenses for every child under her roof. What really set me off was when they both started making it seem like I was being heartless. They talked about how this would ruin the kids' relationships and that it would be my fault if our twins and their stepsister grew distant over this. Seriously? I was just trying to give my own kids a special experience, and now it had turned into this drama about what I wasn't doing for kids who aren't mine. So I told them, I don't think it's fair to expect me to cover everyone's costs. This trip is a treat for our twins. It's during my time with them and I want them to go. I don't see how that's unfair. But Adu kept pushing, saying that if our twins went and her other kids didn't, they'd feel like they were being treated as less than, and that I should care about that. Her husband even threw in talk about family unity, claiming that if the kids ended up resenting each other, it would be on me. By that point, I'd had enough. This wasn't about family unity, it was about them trying to shift their financial responsibilities onto me. It's not like they're struggling financially, they both have decent jobs, and if this trip was so important, they could find a way to make it happen without relying on me. It's not my job to stretch my budget to cover what they can't or won't. The argument just kept going in circles, with them insisting it was unfair and urging me to think of the family, but I held my ground, telling them it wasn't my problem they couldn't afford to send the other kids, and that I wouldn't let them guilt-trip me into paying for it. That's where we left it, but from the look on Otto's face I could tell this wasn't the end of it. Honestly, I walked away feeling both frustrated and confused. No matter how many times I explained that I wasn't responsible for all the kids in her household, they just didn't seem to get it. Somehow my decision to focus on my own kids had become an issue and I was being painted as the villain in their family drama. It's exhausting. All I wanted was to do something nice for my twins, but now it's turned into this massive debate about fairness and unity. I feel like I'm constantly walking a tightrope where any decision could spark another argument. All I wanted was to give my kids a memorable experience, but apparently that's asking too much. So after the whole blow-up over the trip, I thought that would be the end of it, at least for now. I assumed I'd made my stance clear and hoped Adu and her husband would drop it. But no, they weren't about to let it go without another round. What happened next honestly blindsided me. A few days after the argument, I got a message from Adu saying she wanted to meet up and talk. I knew it wasn't going to be a friendly coffee chat, but I figured it was better to just get it over with than keep dragging things out over text. We agreed to meet at a small diner about halfway between our places. She arrived, and I could immediately tell this wasn't going to be quick. She had that serious look, the kind you get when someone's been rehearsing what they're going to say. She sat down and went straight into it. "I don't think you're understanding the situation." And I thought to myself, I think I understand it just fine. I'm paying for my kids, and that's final. But I let her speak her mind. She launched into a long explanation about how I needed to consider the bigger picture and how this wasn't just about a school trip, it was about setting a precedent for how we'd handle things moving forward. It felt like she was framing it as some grand family philosophy to make me feel obligated to agree. She said this trip was just one example and that, down the line, there would be more activities, events, maybe even family vacations, and we needed to be aligned on treating all the kids equally. I couldn't believe it. Was she seriously suggesting I'd have to pay for vacations for all her kids in the future? But I just listened, trying to keep my reaction neutral because I knew getting upset would only make things worse. Then she brought up the fairness angle again, saying if our kids got to do these things and her other kids didn't, it would breed resentment. She warned that the other kids would feel left out, and even claimed it might harm the kids' relationships with each other, causing them to grow up with this imbalance that could tear them apart. I was just sitting there thinking, these kids already have different lives, from different families. Why am I suddenly responsible for fixing that? When she finished, I calmly told her I understood she wanted the kids to feel equal, but these weren't my kids, and they weren't my responsibility. I reminded her that we'd been parallel parenting for some time. She managed things on her side, and I handled my end. But apparently she'd decided that arrangement wasn't good enough anymore. Then she dropped the real bombshell, saying, if you really cared about the kids' well-being, you'd want to support the whole family, not just your kids. She argued that I needed to show good faith by stepping up for her other kids, too. I almost laughed because it sounded so ridiculous. Since when did supporting my kids mean taking on financial responsibility for everyone else's kids, too? I could feel myself getting frustrated. I told her, look, I do care about my kids, that's why I'm willing to do these things for them. But I'm not going to let you guilt trip me into covering expenses for kids who aren't mine. She didn't like that response at all. She immediately got defensive, saying I was being selfish and not thinking about how this would affect the kids long term. I replied, how is it selfish to focus on my own kids? You chose to add these other children to your household, that's not my responsibility. Then her husband showed up. I don't know if he planned to just coincidentally stop by, but suddenly he was there heading straight for our table. He didn't even acknowledge me at first, just went right over to Adu like he was coming to the rescue. He sat down and, without missing a beat, started in on me as if he'd been waiting for this opportunity. I don't think you're being fair, he said. We're supposed to be building a family here, and your actions are putting up walls. I stared at him for a moment, wondering if he actually thought I'd fall for this were all family routine when it came to my wallet. So I told him directly, I'm here to support my twins. That's what I agreed to. You can't just expect me to act like all these other kids are my financial responsibility. And then he hit me with, well, if the kids end up hating each other, that's on you. You're the one creating division. That was it. I fired back, you're the one pushing for me to play dad to kids that aren't mine. I'm not the one making this complicated, I just want to do right by my twins. I didn't care if he thought I was being cold at that point. It felt like both of them were ganging up on me, trying to paint me as the villain just for setting boundaries. Things got tense after that. Adu started saying that if the kids grew up resenting each other, it would be all because I didn't care enough to support her family vision. I could barely believe what I was hearing. I told her, if that's really the case, then maybe you and your husband need to figure out how to handle it, but don't put this all on me. By this point, other people in the diner were starting to look over, but honestly, I didn't care. I was beyond frustrated with being cast as the bad guy just for wanting to do something special for my kids. It was like they expected me to just bankroll whatever they wanted for every kid in their house because they chose to blend their families. I finally stood up and said, look, I've said my piece. My focus is on my twins, and that's not changing. If you want everything to be fair, maybe you should look at what you're doing instead of what I'm doing. I'm done being the bad guy here. And with that, I walked out, feeling a mix of anger and relief. I could feel their eyes on me as I left, as if they were waiting for me to cave and agree to their terms, but I was done. I'd set my boundaries and I wasn't about to let them push me into something I didn't agree to. It's one thing to want your kids to feel part of a family, but it's another to expect someone else to fund the entire setup. After that disastrous conversation at the diner, I thought maybe things would settle down. I assumed Adu and her husband would understand and finally let it go, but I should have known better. Instead of cooling off, the situation escalated. A few days later, I started receiving long-winded texts from her family members. It began with her sister, who had usually stayed out of our conflicts, but now she was messaging me about how important it was for the kids to feel like they were part of one big family. She kept saying things like, if you really cared about your kids' happiness, you'd be willing to do this for them. It felt like she was suggesting that I was in the wrong just because I didn't want to pay for her sister's stepkids. I tried ignoring it, hoping she'd let it drop, but the messages kept coming and only got worse. The tone shifted from subtle hints to outright accusations. Suddenly, I was being called selfish, stingy, and accused of not considering the big picture. They made it sound like I was the one breaking up some idyllic family unit just because I didn't want to finance a trip for kids who aren't mine. Ado's family started acting like I'd declared war on them just because I set a boundary, and then things got even worse. Out of the blue, Ado's mom decided to call me. I hadn't spoken to her in quite a while, so I was genuinely surprised to see her name pop up. I figured maybe she wanted to discuss the twins or have a calm conversation about what was going on. But no, that call turned out to be something else entirely. She launched straight into a long speech about how things should be, telling me if you'd just pay for all the kids, this wouldn't be an issue. You should think about how much better things would be if you were more involved with all the children. I felt my patience slipping pretty quickly. I said, with all due respect, those kids aren't my responsibility. I'm taking care of my own kids, and that's what I signed up for. But she just kept going, saying things like, a good man steps up and takes care of the whole family, not just his own. I was completely floored. I tried explaining that while I wanted the best for my twins, that didn't mean I was obligated to financially support every child her daughter brought into the household. I told her, look, I'm not going to feel bad for setting boundaries and taking care of my own kids. But it was like she wasn't even listening. The whole conversation just spiraled from there. She kept repeating herself, insisting it was my duty as a father and saying that the kids would be the ones to suffer. And yes, she tried to play the guilt card hard. By the end of the call, I was done. I told her it was clear we weren't going to agree on this and politely ended the conversation. But the pressure didn't stop there. Over the following week, it felt like they were rallying the entire family against me. Even Ado's brother left a passive-aggressive comment on one of my social media posts about being a dad, saying, real dads support their families no matter what. It was obvious he wasn't talking about just my kids. I didn't even respond. I simply deleted the comment and moved on, but I won't lie, it annoyed me. I mean, here I am, doing my best for my twins, and somehow that makes me the bad guy in their eyes. One day I dropped the kids off at Ado's, and as I was heading back to my car, her husband caught up with me. He didn't say hello, didn't bother with small talk, he just jumped right in with, you know you're hurting the kids with this. I was honestly taken aback. I thought we'd already hashed this out, but clearly he wasn't done. He started talking about how my decision not to pay for all the kids was creating a divide between the siblings, and that I needed to be more considerate of the family dynamic. I told him, look, I'm not hurting anyone. I'm taking care of my kids, and they're not the ones struggling here, but he wouldn't drop it. He kept going on about how everyone in the family thinks I'm being unfair and that it's only a matter of time before the kids pick up on it and start resenting each other. It felt like he was trying to lay the entire weight of the family's happiness on my shoulders, and I wasn't having it. I told him, your family's opinion doesn't change my responsibilities. I'm not their dad. I'm here for my kids, and that's not going to change. At that point, I wasn't sure what else to say. It felt like no matter what I did, they were going to see me as the villain in their little family story. That night, I was just sitting there trying to figure out how it had come to this. All I wanted was to take care of my kids and give them good experiences, and here I was being painted as some cold-hearted guy who didn't care about family unity. It's like they just couldn't see the line between what's fair and what's not. I ended up venting to a couple of close friends about it. They couldn't believe the amount of pressure Ado's family was putting on me. One of my friends even joked that if they were so worried about the kids missing out, they could all chip in and fund the trip themselves. It made me laugh, but at the same time, it was frustrating. It really felt like her whole family had decided that I owed them something, and they weren't going to let it go until I caved. By the end of that week, I realized that trying to reason with them was pointless. They weren't looking for an explanation, they just wanted me to fall in line. I told myself I wasn't going to let them wear me down. My kids are my responsibility, and I wasn't going to let this whole extended family guilt trip change that. It's crazy to think that all this started just from me trying to pay for my kids' school trip, but now it's turned into this battle over who's doing enough for the whole family. After that week of constant texts, friendly advice, and guilt tripping from Otto's family, I decided I needed to make a final call on where my boundaries stood and stick to them, no exceptions. By this point, it was clear to me that no matter how much I explained myself, they weren't going to get it. They were all laser-focused on this one big, happy family idea, and apparently I was the guy standing in the way by refusing to pay up for every single kid they added to their home. So first things first, I talked to my twins about the upcoming trip. I wanted to make sure they were still excited and didn't feel awkward about it. After all the drama, I didn't want them to feel guilty or responsible for any of it. I kept it simple and said, "Hey, I'm really looking forward to this trip with you guys, and I want you to know that this is something special just for the two of you." I didn't go into all the messy details, obviously, but I wanted them to know it was okay for them to enjoy something just for themselves. Both of them seemed relieved. Kids definitely pick up on tension, and mine had sensed some of it. But they were genuinely happy and excited to go on the trip. Seeing them not feeling bad about it was a huge weight off my shoulders. I needed them to know they deserved nice experiences without feeling responsible for anyone else. With that settled, I knew I had to set clear boundaries with Edu and her family, not just a vague "I'm paying for my kids only" kind of boundary, but a real line they'd understand couldn't be crossed. So I gave her a call, keeping my tone calm and straightforward because I didn't want this turning into yet another hour-long argument. I basically said, "Look, my role as a parent is to support my twins. I'm here for them, and I'm doing what I can to give them good experiences. But that doesn't extend to other children who aren't mine. I respect your choices and your family, but my financial responsibility stops with my twins." Of course, Edu wasn't pleased. She instantly launched into how the other kids would feel left out, and how it's not fair for siblings to have different experiences. I let her talk, but when the guilt tripping started again, I interrupted her. I told her I understand where you're coming from, but this is my final decision. I'm not going to cover any additional costs outside of what I provide for our twins. I added that if she wanted to arrange something for her household, that was up to her, but she had to stop putting that pressure on me. There was a brief silence, and I could tell she was holding back her anger, probably considering one last attempt to sway me, but she must have realized it wasn't going anywhere, because eventually she said something like, "Fine, I guess you've made your choice," with a tone clearly meant to make me feel guilty. But I didn't. By that point, I felt more relief than anything. I was done explaining myself. After that, things were much quieter. No more random messages from her family, no more passive-aggressive comments, just silence. Sure, it was a bit awkward, but the peace was a welcome change. I think they finally realized I wasn't going to give in to their demands, and they had to accept it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I made sure to spend extra time with the twins doing our usual activities, getting food, going to the park, watching movies. I wanted everything to feel normal and for them to feel secure, happy, and unaffected by the drama surrounding them. It was actually refreshing to focus solely on them without any added issues. Then, the day of the trip arrived. I dropped them off at school that morning, and they were all smiles, thrilled to go. Watching them so excited after everything that had happened brought me a real sense of satisfaction. This, I thought, was what truly mattered, not pleasing everyone or bending over backward for people who didn't appreciate it, but giving my kids the best experiences and teaching them that it's okay to set boundaries. And here's the kicker, and yes, I know I said I wouldn't use that word, but bear with me. The day after the trip, Edu called. I braced myself for a snide comment or a passive-aggressive jab, but she surprised me. She simply asked if the kids had fun. I told her they did, keeping it brief because I didn't want to reopen any old arguments, but then she shocked me even more. She actually thanked me for sticking to what I believed was right. She said, "I didn't agree with you, but I respect that you stood up for yourself and for the kids." Hearing that, I was honestly taken aback. I didn't expect her to come around, but there it was. It wasn't an apology, but it felt like an acknowledgement that maybe I wasn't the villain they'd all painted me to be. Since then, things have been a lot more peaceful. I don't hear from her family, and it seems like we've reached a new understanding. We might not agree on everything, but we've both accepted our roles in the kids' lives, and, honestly, I think it's made me a better dad. Now, I'm not constantly second-guessing every choice, worrying about how it will affect her household. I'm just focusing on what's best for my twins. In the end, this whole experience taught me something important. Setting boundaries isn't just about saying no to others, it's about saying yes to your own peace of mind. I've learned that it's okay to prioritize my own family and not feel guilty about it. If others don't understand, that's their issue, not mine. So yeah, things are in a good place now. The twins are happy, I'm happy, and it finally feels like we're moving forward without all the extra baggage. I've clearly stated where I stand, and I think everyone, even Adu and her husband, respects that. It's not perfect, and I'm sure there will be challenges, but at least now I know I can stand my ground and make the choices that are best for my family without getting lost in everyone else's expectations. Update: a few weeks after everything had finally quieted down, I thought maybe I'd heard the last of their demands. But then Adu reached out with something new. She started talking about the twins' living situation at her place, mentioning that they don't have the same comforts they enjoy with me. At first I thought she was just venting, but then she hinted that I should do something about it. Turns out she actually wanted me to buy a house not for me, but for her and the kids. She argued that it wasn't fair for the twins to move between two completely different standards of living, and that it might hurt their self-esteem if they felt like they were lacking at her place. I sat there, trying to process if she was serious, but she was dead serious. She really expected me to buy a second home for the kids to stay in when they were with her, a home she could live in, all on my dime. I tried to stay calm and asked, "How does that make sense? You already have a home." She launched into a rant about how their current house was too small for her family size and how it was affecting the kids' mental well-being. She started talking about equal standards as if I was somehow responsible for every choice she'd made since we split up. When I told her that wasn't going to happen, she pulled out every guilt trip imaginable, saying, "Don't you want the kids to feel just as comfortable at my place as they do with you, and it's unfair that you're not willing to support their full living experience?" She was acting like I was some heartless guy because I didn't want to buy her family a new house. At that point, I was done. I told her, "Look, the twins have everything they need at your place. If you feel they need a bigger home, that's something you and your husband can handle. I'm not responsible for upgrading your house." There was a pause, and then she snapped back, saying, "Well, if the kids end up feeling like they have a real home only with you, that'll be on you." I just shook my head and ended the conversation. I couldn't believe she thought this was a reasonable request. I want the best for my kids, but that doesn't mean I'm buying her an entirely new lifestyle. I guess there's no limit to what she'll ask for, but at least now I know where I stand. I've drawn the line, and I'm not moving it.